Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with our session today. I'm Carissa Miller. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. I'll introduce my fellow presenters here in just a moment. My charge was to give you kind of a landscape overview of what the reporting requirements are, how they've changed from NCLB to now ESSA. But I want to start out just kind of taking it up a level from there, because we could quickly go into the weeds on this, and I'm sure we will have plenty of weedy discussions today and details. Because you're in here because you probably like data a little bit, so you probably get pretty excited about that when we start talking about N sizes and things like that. I know that really gets me up in the morning. So I'm going to start just by saying, I want to think about report cards and why we do them, not just for the exercise of compliance, and also doing it so that we make sure that it matters to our parents, to our public, to the people who care about why we're reporting the data that we're reporting. And we need to make it easily understood for all of those audiences, not just people who live in our world of acronyms or live in the world of data. It's also important for us to know our audience and who we're trying to get that information to. I'm going to pose this question, and I'll come back to it after everybody presents, and I'm going to ask them to answer that, so I'll give them plenty of time to think about it. But the way in which we've gone about doing reporting and doing report cards in the past has been to expect one report card to do it all for us, to think about it as it serves so many multiple purposes, and yet if we're trying to hit a different audience for each of these things, doesn't really get to the core of it. So I want us to think about, do we actually need different report cards? We have parent report cards. Do we have public report cards? Do we have the report card that satisfies what's in the law, just so we get that done? But we do the things that matter and get the information out in the way that it needs to be made. I'd also like us to think about more is not always better in terms of report card. And then this question about coordination between agencies. So those are some things I just want to put in the back of your head as we head into this session. And let me just quickly go over some of the main changes in the report card landscape. So under ESSA, the new Every Student Succeed Act, it still continues to require states to publish annual report cards that include a variety of information. It also, sometimes ironically, I think, says concise, accessible to the public, and presented understandable and uniform format. And then there's a laundry list of things that have to be in there. But I do think that's an important premise for us all to keep in mind as we go into that. Section 1111H is where you find most of this information. And ESSA makes several significant changes requiring specific information both on the state and local report cards. I'm going to do just a few of those things. On your app, CCSSO has put out a comparison of report cards, what was in NCLB and what's in ESSA, that will go way more into detail than we have time to do today. So we continue, the requirement continues for state and local report cards to disaggregate assessment data by major student subgroups, and that the requirement to disaggregate now includes homeless, foster care, and military-connected students, or students who have parents in active duty military. That's a new requirement. There's also more detailed and complex requirements on teachers. You now need to report on inexperienced teaching with emergency and provisional credentials and teaching out of field. And some of these things, if they haven't already been defined at the state level, will have to be defined. States are also being asked to report on school finance data. This is a big one because it also will be at per pupil expenditures of federal, state, and local funds. And some states have dabbled in this and done some of this work, but now it's a requirement under the new law. It also requires some extensive data from the Civil Rights Data Collection Survey, which requires school climate, preschool enrollment, accelerated coursework, and some other places where it was a little less specific in the last iteration of the law. So these are some new requirements as well. It also adds a requirement that the state report cards include performance on NAEP. Now, states have always reported NAEP, but maybe just put up their NAEP data somewhere else, but this requires that the state report cards have the NAEP, the state NAEP data for grades 4 and 8 in reading and in math. Let me just give you on the charter school piece, this is actually in the regulations that were just finalized this week. It asks for the percentage of students in each subgroup, all the iterations of subgroups, in each charter school authorized by the agency, and how it compares to the percentage of LEAs from which the school draws a significant proportion of its enrollment. So there's more details in this handout that I was just referring to for you, but this one is a really, it's a new requirement, and it is pretty specific, and it requires some comparison data. So I wanted to just highlight that. And lastly, so just generally on this, it's what I started with. Clear report cards include relevant data that can be a powerful tool to help people make informed decisions. It also can help educators, policymakers, other stakeholders identify trends. But again, back to the who is your audience and how do you get the right data in front of your audience. And we have to make it so that we're not spending all of our time just creating report cards, that we're actually doing something that creates good data to put on report cards. So let me introduce my fellow panelists here. So from my left all the way down here, Amy Gadara is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Data Quality Campaign. Cindy Williams is a principal at the firm of HCM Strategies. Shan Goff is the Florida Policy Director for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. Martha Ann Todd is the Executive Director for the Governor's Office of Student Achievement in the state of Georgia. Ann Wicks Humphrey is the Director of Education Reform for the George W. Bush Institute. So I'm going to turn it over to each of them, and I'm going to give them the goal of presenting just like they are advocating for student report cards. Succinct, clear, focused, and understood in 5 minutes. So let's see how we do on that. Okay. Ready, set, go.
There we go. All right, go. So good morning, and it's always great to have a chance to talk with people who are diehard data lovers, so thanks for being here. But I also want to start with saying, as the organization at Data Quality Campaign, who's been working for 13 years to really change the conversation around the role of information in education, that data by itself and just the act of collecting data doesn't change a dang thing in the life of a child. And that's really important to say as we start this conversation and to build off of what Carissa is saying. Data by itself is just a tool. And people have to choose to use that tool to open doors for kids. And so this is really about people and how we change how we use information. But people can't use information if they can't find it. If they don't have access to it, they don't know how to use it. And that really is what this panel is going to be about, is how do we make sure that the people who most need the information and have never had it, to be blunt, and we're talking about the public in general, being able to understand how well their neighborhood schools, their community schools are serving all children in their communities, is a really important opportunity and one that ESSA helps to make possible. And there are tons of opportunities, but there are also a lot of challenges, and we'll be talking about lots of bright spots on this panel and hopefully in the conversations. But we released a report yesterday that I hope everyone in the room had a chance to look at, and it's on our website at www.dataqualitycampaign.org. And what that report shows is it shouldn't be this hard, but it is, to find information on how well our schools are serving kids. And what you'll find in the report, and I won't read it, but hopefully on your plane rides home, you all dive into all the materials and then go online when you get home. But what we found is, as a nation, we have not prioritized getting people the information that they need. And we're at a point in our society where we expect information to be at our fingertips in every other part of our lives. And there's no more important discussion and place in our lives that we need information than in education. And I mean as a parent, I mean as a taxpayer, I mean as a citizen, that we deserve this information, we require this information, and we haven't had this information. And there's an opportunity, especially for state policymakers, to prioritize this ability to get information to the hands of people in a timely format format, in a format that can be understood, and in a way that answers people's questions, and not in a compliance mode, but in a way that answers it. And what we found in this report is, while there are bright spots, and you'll see the bright spots in the materials, is that for the most part, the information that's being, data, I won't even say it's information that's being shared, is oftentimes impossible to find. Once people get there, it's clunky, it's hard to navigate on the sites, it's a lot of terms that normal people, not people in rooms like this, but people in plain English, that people can't understand what the data is actually saying. And oftentimes, it's not geared towards actually answering people's priority questions. And yet, we have lots of good examples, and we're going to hear from folks at the state level who are trying to change that conversation and are prioritizing getting that information out. So lots and lots of opportunity, and there are states that are leading on this. And I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to be able, that we will prioritize this as a nation. You know, we have seen unbelievable progress thanks to state leadership, the leadership of folks like you, state policymakers, who have made it a priority to create statewide longitudinal data systems and to build our infrastructure to be able to collect this information. And I have no doubt that state leaders will lead the way and ensure that every state has a powerful tool. I want to close with one thought, because I'm trying really hard to model that good report card thing, that challenge that Carissa gave us, and put up a slide. So one of the key things, and I think the major issue we have going on in education is, by definition, we're in a compliance mode. Our sector has dealt with data as a compliance tool. It is a box-checking exercise that someone says you got to do something, so you do it. And that has been really true about these report cards. These report cards have been on the books now for over a decade. They were mandated that every state had to do a state report card on every school in their state for the last 10 years, and that was mandated in No Child Left Behind. And yet, when people are in compliance mode, that's not about serving people's information needs. That's not about empowering people with the information they need. That's about being compliant to a federal statute and a federal regulation. We now, all of us, have an opportunity to change this conversation and talk about now being accountable to our neighbors, accountable to our citizens, accountable to parents and students to make sure they're getting the information they need. But that requires thinking differently, getting out of a compliance mode and thinking about how do we actually create the tools to meet people's needs. And the first thing is we have to ask people what they need. We need to ask them how they're going to get it. We need to ask what their questions are. And we need to make sure that we get information out to them in a format that makes sense to them. So this graphic, you know, at DQC, our tagline is we're all about changing the role of data from being a hammer to being a flashlight. So we keep this light idea going about empowerment and getting people things to shine a light on what's working, what's not working. So we're using a light bulb here. And for those of you that can't see in the back, the red part is, you know, we have all kinds of requirements. We have requirements about what we can do, about what we're supposed to report. And there, as Carissa just said, we also have requirements in ESSA now. And those requirements are really important things that need to be the foundation. But they only are a floor. And there's so much more that we should be encouraging our states to be getting into the hands of people that can truly shine a light on what we need to know and what parents want to know, what our public wants to know about how well our schools are serving all students. So I encourage you, and I'll stop here, and I look forward to the conversation and hearing other panelists, but there's a real opportunity here, and it's not about beating up on what we haven't done, and instead saying, how do we all, not just state agencies, but every policymaker in a state, focus on prioritizing getting your citizens the information they need in a way that they can use it to ensure that every student in your state is prepared for success in life. So thanks, and thanks for having me today.
So I have had the privilege over the last 2 years, along with my colleagues at HCM, of doing a whole lot of research about what it is parents think. And I feel like it's been unprecedented, that all of a sudden we have an opportunity to really focus on the parent as an end user. And I know for many of us who've worked in state and federal government, the parent becomes something we tweak for. Right? So you create the document for whoever the document's really for, the superintendent or the chief or the administrators, and then you go back and go, oh no, I've got to actually show this to a parent. Let me just change these words and make it a little bit more understandable and then push it out. And so I do feel like just we're all going to probably pound the opportunity hammer today, but this is an opportunity to create something by design for parents on the front end. And as Carissa said at the beginning, I think where it is murky, and I'm certainly not the expert, is can we create something that is different for different people, right? Which I know sounds like a lot of work, but we're going to help with that. But is there a state report card that is for your administrators and your superintendents? Is there a district level? And then is there something that you can create that is the right grain size, the right language, the right design for a parent? So that is what Learning Heroes is trying to help all of you do, realizing that you have 1,000 things and that on your list of priorities this may come somewhere in the middle. So we have been doing research across the country for 2 years. We started with score reports, working with Park and Smarter Balance to figure out how do we create a document that parents can read and understand about how their child did on the state test in math and English. And I will tell you, we are not the in-size. I mean, I would read something, I would understand it perfectly, we'd test it, parents wouldn't understand a word, we'd try again, we'd test it, they'd understand half, we'd test it again. We finally got to a place where we thought we really started to understand the taxonomy. So this just shows you, we've been everywhere. The philanthropic community has been fantastic. They've stepped up. They've invested almost $2 million now between score reports and what we're trying to do with these report cards and understanding what are parents' expectations around school, what are their expectations about the information they get about their actual student, and what is this definition of accountability and how do we make it personal to them. So I just know that we're going to have a robust discussion, so I'm just going to try to be a little bit provocative in just showing you a few things, and then we'll go from there. But some of my favorite anecdotes from some of my the focus group work that we've done with Learning Heroes, we were in Santa Ana, an almost entirely Hispanic community where they did not receive their score reports in Spanish, by the way, only in English. But when they saw the term climate and culture, culture meant immigration status to them. So we use climate and culture as just sort of a part of our everyday life in the way that we talk about the work that we do. But those words, climate actually meant, is it humid in my classroom? Right? Like weather. So we assume these words mean something because they mean something to us. Student growth actually means, did the number of students grow in my school? Did my school get bigger? Right? That word growth, that means a lot of things to a lot of people. So proficient has been amazing. I have 100 definitions of the word proficient. Everything from excellent and mastery to just jumping over the bar to mediocre. Like that word, you just pick a person and you're going to get a different definition of that word. So we have learned a lot about how you present this information and how you talk about it. The last thing I will say to stay in my 5 minutes, disaggregation of the data is complicated. So I was in the Bush White House during No Child Left Behind. I am a huge proponent of disaggregation of data. I think I have personally, as well as a lot of my former colleagues, been a part of the problem in how we talk about it. So as we have been across the country in New Mexico and Mississippi and Ohio, the disaggregation of data to the populations that we serve is an exercise for many in shaming. And they don't understand it, and in this sort of really cynical environment that we're living in right now, where intentions are not best, we don't give necessarily people in government the benefit of the doubt. The intentions are not good. And we heard some really disturbing things pre-election in some of our focus groups around why we would disaggregate this data. And so I just feel like as a community, we need to struggle with that a little bit and figure out, one, not to ever present it without context. If they're not going to assume good intentions, we're going to have to really tell them why it is we do this, to shine a spotlight on those areas where they need more additional support and we need to be filling gaps. But I would argue that there's a real conversation that needs to be had about how much disaggregation needs to be at the parent level. So I could talk for hours, but I'm not. Thank you.
Well, Carissa, I should probably tell you, is the two southern states wishbird, we're not going to be within our 5-minute limit. So didn't want you to be surprised. Yes, you're so surprised. But to give you some perspectives and also give you a little bit more information, I also know that we have spent the last day and a half talking about a collective issue and meaning that improving student achievement, providing people more information. And this whole panel gives you folks representing national perspectives that are in this space and in this game and are huge resources to individual states, whether you're an agency or a legislature, to help leverage that. Part of, you've heard each speaker so far echo, know who your audience is. Yes, I worked in one of those state educational agencies, and absolutely we were queens of cut and paste. Whether you were this audience, and this audience, we didn't necessarily think about the words we were using. You got good information, but it was highly technical. So representing ExcelinEd, and so you might wonder, what's ExcelinEd doing in this space? And I will clearly tell you that this has been a passion project of Patricia Levesque, our CEO, and it really has its roots back in 2014 when ExcelinEd did some research about what do parents want to know about student performance, whether it's student growth. And you know that one of our cornerstone policies is A through F school grading and accountability, and you have to build a base and support for that. And what better way than to make sure families might have a clue, what does that school grade mean? What does the data mean? And remembering we are the third largest state. We only have 67 counties, but we have over 3,400 schools that participate in our school accountability system. So the initiative that we call Know Your School Project really started back in 2014 when it was a review of the state report cards, and there's lots of cute stories about what really happened, and then identifying what were the major components that you've already heard our first two speakers talk about. And I especially like the conversation about words, because we are kind of in the middle of that as well. So ExcelinEd just had this brilliant idea to do a national contest. So they just put some parameters out. They asked all of the incredibly smart people in technology and communication, so give us your winning design. And we have links to that full story, and in fact it's our report card challenge, and the entries, well, there was a dollar amount at the end, but the entries were judged by a group of very diverse people across the state, across the country, did include a superintendent from one of our public schools, and they picked a winner. And then our winner actually was, I'll do a little commercial announcement, was Collaborative Communications and Social Driver, and we have representatives here. And then ExcelinEd started the venture to build a prototype of what we believed, based upon the research, the collaboration, and the information we're getting from a lot of our national partners, about what would be an interactive website that would talk about our state's accountability system or a state's accountability system. And then just to give you a little twist, because to show you all those theoretical models and those wireframes and all of that, that's really not a lot of fun if you're sitting in the audience. So we went a step further. Patricia clearly directed us a step further, is we used Florida data as the prototype. Half of our staff are based in Florida. Florida has a long history about accurate, reliable, and transparent data. And our current school report card or grading website from our agency, and God knows I spent half a life there and I understand how it works, was really an Excel spreadsheet. So if you didn't have Excel capabilities, it was really difficult, even if you were an administrator, much less a family. But the key pieces about Florida's data: accurate, transparent, and available. So we actually, with partners, specifically a local partner from Jacksonville Public Education Fund, we embarked on, we have a big project, Know Your School, but then a very interactive prototype, which is Know Your Florida School. And I think we actually have a 1-minute video that'll showcase that.
Every parent wants to make sure their child gets a great education. But it isn't always easy to get the information they need to know about how their school is performing. That's what led to the creation of Know Your School, an innovative exemplar tool designed and first launched in Florida, specifically for parents to easily access information online about their child's school. Through this user-friendly interface, parents can put important information like school performance and student achievement in context, and understand what it all means. Know Your School doesn't just provide information, it empowers parents to engage with teachers, their school, and the community. Plus, with a mobile-friendly design that includes social and email sharing, they can engage anytime, anywhere. Visit knowyourfloridaschool.org today to learn more.
So the piece remembering what ExcelinEd, why we were in the game, to encourage other states and entities to develop transparent report cards so that families have access to information that makes sense. And some of the components you heard here. Mobile friendly, you heard today by multiple speakers that sometimes that's all people have to access the internet, and it's helpful. And then I just want to add one piece that we think sets some of this information apart. One of our missions also was trying to build that collective support for high standards, for high quality assessments, and maybe most importantly, accountability, was to make sure that there was information that I, as the parent, had a takeaway message. So there are certain components in when we break down and show what did that 66% mean. There is a statement, we call it parent empowerment statements, that tries to use, I certainly hope, real words that families understand. Where does my high school fit in the third largest states, and how many hundreds and hundreds of high schools that we have? What's that performance? Because most parents think their school does just fine. What does the data really reflect? And then the key part is the second part of the sentence that says, talk to your teachers. What can you do to help improve student achievement? Or for the schools that are performing in the very top quartile, it says, thank your teachers and principal for such a good job, or a job well done. So obviously there's math and functionality and programming behind it, but to me it was just a little different twist to make this much more personal and an interactive website for me as a parent. We have two handouts there, remembering we're here to help promote states to take the next step, and you also heard that our contractors used open source code, which means it's free, and we look forward with lots of our national partners helping states take the next journey, as Georgia already has.
So ready for me?
Yes, that was my segue to you.
All right, can I have the clicker? Thank you. Good morning, thank you for being here. I'll give you a little bit of context around the work in Georgia. I represent the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, which is the Governor's education agency. We provide a good bit of policy support to the Governor and to legislators in the education area in Georgia. But we also have legislative authority for auditing and accountability in our state, and we work collaboratively with the State Department of Education around things to do with school accountability, school measures, and school index. And so as we go through this process, I'm going to show you some products of the Department of Education and some things that we have put together to try to help communicate that. We're currently working with the Department of Education now in conversation about how do we revise the existing school accountability measures in Georgia to reflect some of the flexibility and additional requirements in ESSA. And I will tell you, one of our key areas of focus is to remove some of the unnecessary elements in our existing accountability measure in Georgia. We have in the high school accountability index 27 indicators, 18 in the elementary school. And a good number of those are inputs. So we're looking very forward to having the opportunity that ESSA has provided to revisit that and really focus on those that are most meaningful for student outcomes. And you'll see some of the things that we think are most important as we go through what I'm going to share with you. We were told clearly legislatively that our responsibility is to provide clear, transparent, usable, reliable information to all stakeholders in Georgia. So we have made it our mission to try to do just that in some of the reporting tools that we have provided. We heard yesterday morning that a story is worth 1,000,000 data points, and we all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to ask you to put on your parent hat, not your researcher hat, not your educator hat, but just think as a parent or a grandparent perhaps. And I want you to see what you see if you go online in Georgia and look at the School Accountability Index tool from the Department of Education. Now, there is a very dedicated team of folks that work there, and they have worked very hard to get this information, develop these calculations, and provide data to schools, principals, superintendents, researchers that they love, that they may not love, they know in the schools, they know this data. As a parent, if I look at that, my eyes roll back in my head. We in our agency provide the state report card. That's what you see. You can't even read it from where you are, but that's about how appealing it looks. The state report card, a little bit differently from the accountability index, just provides all the data reporting that we were talking about earlier. Now we'll be adding to that to meet the requirements of ESSA. We have some state requirements also that we provide here. There are multiple tabs, lots of pages that look just like that. We have built some ability to create some graphs and visuals in there, but because of the amount of data and all the requirements, it's just not a place to provide information that's helpful to parents. There's too much stuff there, and researchers go there, school people sometimes dig in that data, but it's not a very useful tool for parents or community members in any way. So, we have developed a new tool, and if you have your phone, you will be able to see this. You're welcome to play with it while I'm talking if you want to. It is visible. We wanted to make a hybrid tool that would provide parents with the information that was most useful to them in a very visual and easily accessible way. So we had to do some picking and choosing, obviously, from all of that data and all of those places that we already have it provided, and we built a hybrid of sorts. One of the things that you see here is the first page where you go, and if you're looking on your phone, you're probably at this page now. You can choose a school district or type in the name of the school, very easy to find. I will tell you while I'm clicking through a couple of pictures here, just let you see what this looks like, that we had great partnerships in developing this. We had a tremendous amount of support from the Foundation in Excellence in Education. We really borrowed a lot and took a lot of ideas from that competition. We looked at the finalists and the winners, and we found things we liked. We thought of other things that we wanted to add. We also worked in partnership with the Department of Education and with the Technology Authority in Georgia to build our tool. When you go to a school, and this is a high school, you see that there is clearly a letter grade represented there, but there is also up in the top right-hand corner for you a summary that I think is critically important that provides key information for parents. What do parents most want to know? So we chose to do some summary statements for the high school. This high school is performing overall better than 43% of the schools in the state. Well, that's not too impressive. But if you look at the next thing, you can see also that the high school's growth is greater, progress toward the goal is greater than 85% of the high schools in the state. So we tried to zero in on key points. And of course, for high school, we reflect the graduation rate there and college and career readiness there. The elementary indicators and middle school indicators are a little bit different. You see also that in addition to the letter grade, there's the numerical grade and the graph that shows the trend over time. So it's very easy to see if your school is improving or declining. I got lots of phone calls, obviously, when we released this last year, some from some superintendents who were not too happy, and some from principals who were not too happy. There's some schools in our state that are C schools that really don't like to be called C schools and don't think of themselves as C schools. But this provided us an opportunity to say to them, you have some critical messages here. You can point out to your constituency that yes, we're not where we need to be, but we are growing and improving at a very good rate. And here's some areas where we need your help, and here's some areas where we're doing well. This is another screenshot toward the end of the presentation. In between that I have skipped over, there are some graphic representations, very visual, of school demographics, also performance on key test indicators like third grade reading in the elementary school, for example, English, language, arts, and math at all grade levels. There's one graphic there that shows some key piece of that information, not all of that huge spreadsheet's worth. But at the end here, you see that you can compare your school to other schools. You can see this bottom indicator for high schools is the graduation rate. And we show that. We have key indicators for all the other levels as well. But you can share it on social media, which we think is a key component for communication to parents. That's the way people find information these days. We're actually about to begin a big social media campaign from our office to publicize this tool even more in Georgia. It's downloadable as a PDF for every school. It's about 3 pages, so it's easy to print out and share also if you need to hand somebody a copy. And if you really want to dig into the spreadsheet, you can download the data behind these calculations as well, and it's translated into Spanish as well. Sam is in the back of the room. Sam Rauschenberg is on our team. He's done a lot of the heavy lifting on this work, and he's sitting back there because he is afraid I'm going to say we're going to do something else, like translated into Chinese. I've teased about that a little bit, but we will be adding other pieces to this as we release it in the future. In fact, we'll release in January the 2016 version, and we expect to reflect, in Georgia, every school has a school climate rating of 1 to 5 stars. We'll reflect that here because we think that's something parents want to know. Probably a year from now, every school will have a financial efficiency rating of 1 to 5 stars. We will reflect that here. So we will continue to add key pieces of information for parents, but not all of the information that we know. Again, with the idea that we really want to make it what parents most need to know, not everything they could know. Another piece that we're adding is the ability to compare to schools like yours. Now you can compare to any other school that you choose, but there's no way for a parent to know that how similar that school is to theirs, and so we'll be adding that capability in the future as well. I was asked to tell you just a little bit about some of the tools that we use. I've already referenced the competition that the foundation did that really provided us with a lot of information. We house in our agency Georgia's P20 research data system. It's not an operational system that people go in and out of every day. It's a very tightly controlled, highly secure system, but it allows us to match data across multiple agencies in Georgia. In fact, there are 7 different education agencies that contribute data. We also have a little bit of workforce data, and then we get data from the National Student Clearinghouse as well as AP, SAT, ACT data that we add into that, and that has allowed us to be able to pull data that is coming from the Department of Education, but also from our report card, and build this hybrid model. That's been a key tool for us to use. Lessons learned. I will tell you that one of the things that it was critical and key in making this possible was the support and determination of our governor. Governor Deal was very insistent that we needed this kind of clear communication to parents, that it was clearly visible to parents how their schools were doing and how they could get involved and help them improve, and where they needed to get involved and help them improve. We have been very careful also to assure everybody in this process, not just with this tool, but with the data system that we have, that data is secure and privacy is protected. That's something that we get lots of questions about, and that will be a key thing to keep in mind. We also would say to you, don't spend time and energy reinventing the wheel. We borrowed a lot. We don't believe in recreating what's already there, but we did look at a lot of different resources to put together what made sense for us in Georgia. So certainly design what works for you, but don't feel like you have to build everything yourself. Be prepared for ongoing iterations. Those are things that we're always looking at. What are parents asking for? What do we hear from other stakeholders that would be important to see here? What do our data tools allow us to provide that maybe we weren't able to provide in the first or second iteration? And then again, I've already alluded to this, but the really clear communication plan, having this tool available on a phone is number one in that because we know that's where people get their information much more so than from a computer screen. But really we'll be working over the next year to really push this out on social media. We've been in conversations with great schools about linking to our site from their reports on schools in Georgia. And we also provide out of our office school awards each year for schools that show the highest performance. So we have a high performing award, but we also have awards for schools that show the greatest gains. So we're really providing avenues for schools to highlight and recognition for them in highlighting their performance as well. And we'll continue to consider additional categories that we might want to add to that in the future to help provide support for schools in communicating out what this means to them and to their parents and to their stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Congrats on making it to the last session before lunch and the last person on the panel. You're doing great. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a report card that we put out this fall. It is not a state report card, and you may wonder why I'm sitting here telling you about it, but it is a city-based report card with lots of different publicly available education data points. So I'm going to tell you about three things. I'll give you a little background on the tool. I'm going to show you some screenshots just so you get a little flavor of what it's like, but you really have to go online to really get it. So my motive is to drive you to our site and help increase our numbers. And then the third thing, I'll just tell you a few things that we've learned. Nothing is rocket science, but if it's useful to you as you're creating these and crafting these, I hope you take it, and we're happy to go into more detail in the questions or offline. Feel free to find me. So the background on this, as you all probably know, President Bush has a long legacy of a commitment to comparable, valid, actionable data. That started when he was governor of Texas and certainly continued in his administration in the White House. This project got started, we're located actually on the SMU campus in Dallas, if you're not familiar. And this project started when the Dallas mayor, Mike Rawlings, came to the Institute and said, okay, mayors have all this implied or real authority or responsibility for school systems, but I have no idea where to start. What data should I look at? What is going to be useful to me? Can you guys help me? That is like catnip to us. So we said, yes, of course, we can try to help you. The first version of this report, am I supposed to aim this somewhere? Apparently there. Was actually paper-based. We did this, and it came out a couple of years ago and had about 30 cities included in it, and Mayor Rawlings took it to the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The response was so overwhelming that we realized we had to do a 2.0 version of it, working also with partners at Collaborative Communications who are sitting in the back, and we highly recommend to help take really complicated information and try to make it accessible. And I'll be very clear, our audience for this tool are mayors, city leaders, district leaders. So we're not talking about parents, as my fellow panelists are, and that's an important distinction for us, but I can't emphasize what Cindy was talking about earlier enough, that even when you think you have made it clear, you haven't, no matter who your audience is, and that's a really important thing to test and clarify. So this tool really is to aggregate about 30 different education data points that are all publicly available into a city context. There's 114 cities in there right now, all of whom are about 100,000 or more in population. That gives us the right end size to have reliable data. And the key thing about our online tool is we wanted to let users really drive how they wanted to investigate and compare data, which you'll see this. And of course, under ESSA, state and local power and knowledge is really important to have data, to be able to use data. And another piece that we did in this, we didn't do it with the expectation that we had perfect, clean, comparable data everywhere we wanted it. We wanted to take what we could find, make it as useful as possible, and also to highlight the places where we simply didn't have data that we needed, so folks could see that in the context of a report. The link is there. Please go to it on your phones or laptops. Today, every day, it's a lot of fun, I promise. Okay, so I'm going to start with truly the wonkiest chart. But this is what you're looking at is the city reports page. And I've pulled, I'm comparing Chicago, go Cubs, and Los Angeles because I used to live there, but you can pick any city you want. If you pick the city where you're sitting, it'll geolocate and see that you're in Washington, D.C. right now. For a comparison city, it'll suggest ones that are similar to D.C. if that's useful to you, but you can also pick anything you like, which is, if there's a way to do that for you, it's one of the lessons, I think, in your state context, this comparability and some suggestions around how to do that. I think people love being able to investigate that way. So you'll see our tool is the data is divided into 6 categories. Academic outcomes, that's one of the ones you're looking at right now. District trends, which includes things like enrollment. School finance, which is revenue and spending. Teacher salaries. Career and college pathways, and that is AP participation, graduation rates, ACT, SAT scores, FAFSA completion. School characteristics, which include teacher absenteeism, the percentage of new teachers you may have in a district, suspensions, chronic absenteeism, that's a new emerging data set we're really interested in. And then for early childhood, what is the enrollment in district programs? Do they have programs available particularly for kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch, who need free or low-cost programs? So this chart, what you're looking at, academic outcomes, is TUDA data, and this is a really cool thing, this bubble scatter plot. I think there's a more technical name for it, but that's what I like to call it. What you can see here, the L and the C mark where Chicago is in the upper right, Los Angeles is sort of in the lower left there. I've selected TUDA data, I'm looking at percent proficient, 4th grade, and I'm looking at reading in the 14-15 school year. You can see the bubbles are subgroups by race. The y-axis is percent proficient. The x-axis is free and reduced lunch, so you can see where folks are clustering in these cities. There's a line through the middle that's just a regression that's showing expected performance. Be careful, people's eyes glaze over in regression for obvious reasons. So here's what in the next slide, what I'm gonna change. I just went to 8th grade because I wanted to see what was different when I went to 8th grade. Los Angeles stayed the same, but the interesting thing in Chicago is their performance for black students in 8th grade dropped 5 percentage points between 4th and 8th grade when they're looking at this data. So if that's a place I'm interested in, I'm gonna wanna pursue. I might wanna find out what's happening to explain those kinds of data. You can look at state assessments, middle school algebra completion in this section. Here's the state assessment chart you'll see for Chicago and Los Angeles. This is looking at, I think 11-12 is the first year, 14-15 is the next year. We're looking at AP course participation, and it gives you by subgroup, you can see how kids are performing. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on these, I just want you to be excited to go explore. Chronic absenteeism is this chart, and there is an interesting data point I just wanted to make sure I could see. For both of these cities, 21% of their black students are absent more than 15 days a year, which, if you're looking at what's happening in your district, like I said, these are district reported data right now. OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, is going to put out what we hope is a little cleaner data set going forward that we're really interested in, but those are the things that this tool helps you to see and understand. And here's what I mean when I'm looking at the early childhood enrollment about it's not all perfect. There's no data reported to us by Los Angeles that we could find, so they don't have any data about early childhood, but we've included it so you could see that it's missing there. This is looking at enrollment in district programs, or it also could be Los Angeles doesn't operate them through their district, and so the data lives outside what we were able to find. And that's all explained when we have exemptions through the tool. This last screenshot I'll show you is what we affectionately call the rabbit hole. This is the Explore tab that lets you drop down and pick 3 different measures that you want to compare the entire data set on. So I've looked at middle school algebra completion against chronic absenteeism and then median family income. You can explore and look at lots of different things on this page. You can download the data set if you're that kind of data nerd, and I applaud you if you are. But there's lots and lots that you can do here and filter through cities to really try to winnow in on specific issues or problems. So bushcenter.org/state of our cities, you should go check it out. The things that I'll tell you in terms of the lessons that we have learned, for sure, is that it is one of the things we're doing now that we should have done ahead of time. We launched this in September, is actually helped our users be successful in using this tool. So one of the things we're doing is creating a video tour, really short, not super fancy, but actually going through with the tool active so that people can see it. We want them to be successful using this. The other piece that we're doing is creating some support materials for folks in our key constituents, which for us would be, for example, like a mayor's office, a district leader, that they have some talking points and perhaps a PowerPoint template if they're trying to use this data to make a case for something. So whatever those constituencies are in your context, is it a PTA, is it a principal, how do you set them up to be successful to use what you've created? And I think the second piece that I would encourage is to not let the perfect become the enemy of the good. That is not unique to me, but we could have iterated on this thing forever to try to get it just clear and perfect, and we just had to go to market with it, quite frankly, and set the expectation that we're going to put it out, we're going to use it, and we're going to learn a lot and make it better over time because people are using it and giving us our feedback. So I think setting that expectation is important. And the third thing I'll tell you is there's a tab in here that's called About the Data that explains exactly where we got every piece of data that's in here, what is workable or not workable about that data, so that folks can explore that on their own. They're not trusting us to say, oh, this is what it is. They can go get it themselves. And I think that piece is really important. And then the fourth thing is that we have a spotlight section that lets us editorialize a bit where there's places that comparable data doesn't exist. And that might be something that's useful to you because you can participate if there's a conversation happening about that in your context and to talk about that in an editorial way so that its absence from your scorecard doesn't seem strange and kind of gives you some ownership of that space. Our first one is on after school because there's no comparable data. So with that, I'll stop.
Thanks to everybody on our panel, and you guys did a yeoman's job with a very large panel of great women, right? So I'm going to open it up to questions because we have about 15 minutes left. If there's a mic right here in the center of the room. I was supposed to remind everybody that this is being recorded, and there are friends from the media in the room at the beginning, so I'll do that now. If there aren't questions, I've got some that I'm going to rapid fire back and forth, but I want to make sure the audience has a chance as well. As you guys are coming up, I'm going to ask Anne. We talked about audience, and I think it's kind of nice for yours to be outside of the parent report and state report because it helps us get our heads out of the weeds on this and just take a step back. But talk a little bit about the questions you asked yourself about how do we get, you knew who your audience was, but how did you decide what those 30 elements were going to be, and what were the questions you asked yourself that you might give advice to the audience?
I wish I could say we had this incredibly thoughtful process around that to be impressive, but quite frankly, we had to figure out what was available, what data is actually available. Step one. And that will take a long, that probably won't be the most fun thing you ever do, but it's essential. What are we actually tracking? What do we have? What shape is it in? What years do we have? And given that universe, then what can we cull from that? And that's truly how our process went. We'll update the data in this tool about every 2 years because that's about the right cadence where we've been enough fresh to include that. So that's something important to think about if you have things that go beyond annual that you're including for whatever reasons, editorially or otherwise.
Thank you. So I think we have a question in the audience. So if you just identify who you are and if you're addressing your question specifically to one person, or if you want.
Sure. So my name is Ilde Lasko-Kerr. I'm from the Charter Schools Association and the Center for Student Achievement in Arizona. And I want to just sort of make a general statement and then ask a question. So given the nature of an incredibly conservative electorate, and I think the woman from Georgia mentioned the need to ensure that to the community that data is being protected and that privacy concerns have been taken care of. Accessing data and reporting data are incredibly important as a public policy conversation. How have you balanced that in terms of reporting? And then just an ask for Amy and the data quality campaign. So in Arizona, as an example, we have a department that is taking FERPA and the expectation for privacy, I think, well beyond any intended scope, and not just obfuscating and obscuring the data that's small in size, but actually changing the aggregate data so that it no longer reflects the accurate information. So if there is something that national leaders can help provide some guidance and maybe put out some statements around how to appropriately manage the requirements of FERPA with the obligation to publicly report, would be really valuable to at least us in Arizona.
Yeah, sure. That is a really important question and conversation. First statement is, again, people won't use data if they can't find it. They won't use data if they don't find value in it, meaning it answers their priority questions, the questions they have, and they won't use it if they don't trust it. And they don't trust it's not going to be used to hurt them and their children. So the trust issue is absolutely important. And as you all know better than we do, this has been a conversation in every single state in the country except for Vermont. And I want to figure out what's happening in Vermont that they don't have to talk about privacy. But it's, we have had over 400 pieces of legislation across this country having this conversation about the power of information to truly transform education and to help every child succeed. And at the same time, how do we also make sure, I don't use the word balance because balance makes it sound like it's an either or, and it's not. We need to change the culture in education to say that effective use, responsible use of data, ethical use of data means that inherent in that use is a protection and a sense that this information is being kept secure, private, confidential. And yet it's hard when you get down to brass tacks and say, so what is that end size? I would recommend to leaders that the Department of Education's Privacy Technical Assistance Committee Council, PTAC, has done some great research on end sizes and helping districts and states and researchers understand how do you balance that end size with actually getting real information out in people's hands. And I want to also answer that there's a really important audience question in this also, and that's the advocacy community, because part of this is how do we get information out into the public? And I think it's important to say that all the information that we're talking about out here is aggregate information. There's no identifiable information. When we're talking about publicly reporting, this is information that has no student level information, it's aggregated, and yet this issue of at what, for those of you that don't even live end sizes, it means how small can you go in reporting if it might be possible to identify a single student, which means in lots of places, we now don't actually report information on schools. And so that actually hides what's happening in those schools. And so this is a really, really important question. So PTAC's a great resource. There's some great privacy leaders and other sectors that are thinking about this. We have some papers on our data quality campaign website. But I also think that this needs to be a conversation about why data matters and why having access to information matters, so that it does not just become a question about shut down data because there's too much risk involved. So really important question, and thank you for asking it. And yes, all of us as national advocates and at the state level and local level need to be really involved in making sure those conversations happen.
So as we tee up our next question, Martha Ann, can you guys talk a little bit about the end size and how you went about doing privacy protections in your reports?
Georgia has had an end size of 15 in AYP reporting and now currently in our accountability reporting for a long time, and we have been very consistent with that. We also have 2 student data systems in Georgia, really. We talk about LDS and then we talk about Georgia Awards, which is our P20. The LDS system belongs to the K-12 universe, and it is accessible only to those teachers. In some districts, they've made it accessible to parents for their students. So there's been a lot of work in that. Parents are familiar with that. Teachers, school districts are familiar with that. That's an operational system. We have, in the Georgia Award system, built a very secure research-oriented system where we have PII only briefly when data is delivered, and we match it with the unique...
personally identifiable
yes,
information.
I'm sorry, personally identifiable information is only briefly there to a very secure 2 or 3 people in our agency, and then it's matched with a unique identifier and cannot be identified again except by those folks who actually owned and sent us the data. So we really have worked hard to build those trust values.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
I think when we think about privacy in Florida, for example, they have publicly reported aggregate data for years, maybe not in a user-friendly way, but maybe just a caution, if you're a state that embarks on a new transparency, a new website, a way that you make this data more user-friendly, you don't forget to do the protective work to remind your community about your data privacy protections, because otherwise you'll be in the middle of launch and then all of a sudden somebody will bring up questions. So if data privacy has not been an issue in your state, when you start sharing large pieces of data in an aggregate format where people are actually paying attention, build in there your messaging about how you make sure that this data is protected and actually belongs to the parents and the student.
Let's go to our next question.
Hi, I'm Donique Reed from the Alliance for Excellent Education, and thank you all for sharing the details of your wonderful work. In one of the sessions yesterday, the panelists surfaced this idea of sharing data for the sake of sharing data and like the lack of political will for change. So I'm curious, in your redesign, how do you grapple with the issue of sharing complex data for struggling learners in a way that kind of empowers the viewer to take change on the areas that need change? You know, like how do you redesign or design a platform that doesn't, where important data doesn't get lost, I guess.
Anyone want to take a shot at that? I'll give one person to take it on that. Anybody?
I'll say very quick, these are the ladies down here know more because they've actually built it. The number one way that you get people to use your stuff is you ask people what they need. I mean, the number one thing is ask those parents, ask users, what is it that you want to know? People will then use what it is and then make sure you meet their needs and that you, as people have said, that you're getting the information in the format that they want, it's answering their questions, it's in a timely way, and that they can understand and they know how to use it.
Well, let me ask a more specific question. Cindy, talk about the trends you've seen from parents, because you've done a lot of interviews with parents, you've talked to a lot of parents, the trends that you find to be universally true in the number of states you've worked in, but also some of the things that are more regionally specific. You talked about the word culture being a regionally specific thing, but talk to us about some of the things that might be universally true that we know that are important.
Sure. I think it's always important to think about the fact that the parents' in size is really just the number of kids they have in your school. So everything emanates from that point. So they're not interested, as we are, in the broader world. So we have seen this more so probably in rural than in the suburbs. I'm looking at Erica, who's been in all of them. But truly, they're not interested in looking at any data that's beyond their district. They actually don't want to see data beyond a school they could actually move to, right? So it can be even upsetting for them to see that the schools in other parts of the state where they could never go are actually doing better. So the lens is just so very different. The other thing I would say that's been sort of fascinating for us is when you're in a choice-rich environment versus a not-choice environment, those parents are dramatically different. So, and it has nothing to do with education level. So I just think it's something we all have to ponder. So you can have somebody with a 3rd or a 6th grade education as a parent who is in the District of Columbia, who knows everything there is to know about all the schools in which their child could go, and are actually down to a level of detail that is very unusual for any of the other parents that we've talked to. We saw the same thing in San Francisco, where again they have a choice-rich environment. You go to Mississippi or an area where there's no choice and they can't tell you anything about any school and very little about their own for lots of reasons. But I just think we're seeing dramatic differences regionally, but the information they want, it's about meeting parents where they are and not as reformers being dismissive of what they care about. We know what we care about. We care about academic achievement, particularly for those students who we signed up to serve. But what they care about first and foremost in most of these communities is my child safe? Second, is my child happy? Which is why you see these crazy numbers of 90% of parents thinking their kids are okay and on track, and them giving their own school a B, but the schools around them a C or a D. And so I think the larger question here is, can we use this opportunity to create demand for the change that we've all been advocating for some time, right? The accurate information prioritized in a way they want to see it. And they really want to see growth. So the last point I'll make there is trajectory. So one of the fascinating things that I was talking to a couple of chiefs about yesterday is the school being on an upward track of growth is more important to most of the parents we've talked about than the school having the high rating that is static. And so, whereas we might choose the school that has an 80%, they might choose the school that has a 70%, but they see that it's going up. And so I think how we present the information, that graphic, did so much better than the static. And so there's some things there that we're seeing universally that are helping us think through how would we do this differently.
Let's go to our next.
Hello, my name is Andy Burns of the Durango, Colorado Board of Education. Thanks for the wonderfully rich conversation.
I don't think we can hear you. Can you guys hear him? Good.
Hello, thanks for the wonderfully rich conversation this morning. When I think about the Georgia model, I see which I think is really thoughtful and wonderful. I see an opportunity to represent all of the schools in a community, including private and parochial schools. So kind of a question, two-part question is it in the state's best interest to try to encourage participation from private and parochial schools, and without that direct accountability pipeline that those in the public education sector have, that the privates don't have, how do you engage private and parochial leaders to participate if a state is willing to provide that, so that families and community members get a complete understanding of all the schools in their community?
At this point in Georgia, that's probably not something that's really feasible or possible for us to do, simply because of all the data points we have around the public schools, whether traditional public schools or charter schools. We have tons of data. Around the private schools, there's really no data available. In Georgia, private schools are not required to report out any kind of student performance data or any of the other demographic characteristic data or anything else that we would be reporting. Could we in the future offer it as an opportunity? There's always possibility for that. Of course, that's another large lift and endeavor that would have to have some will on the part of the independent and private school association to have that happen before we could go there, because that's a data collection issue in addition to the build issue.
Right. I think Shan wanted to get in. There are places where, if given Title I funding, for example, or other kinds of funding, that the requirement that comes along with that is reporting and providing information, on an accountability system or some visibility into the use of it.
And I was just going to say, just because I think all states are probably pretty much in that same spot, but think about it incrementally. As you wouldn't be surprised, ExcelinEd has a long-term plan, and we have phases. So one of the phases that we really want to look at is, so what are my choice options within my zip code when I search? Mm-hmm. And you may not have academic achievement data on that private school or that faith-based school, but to start the conversation about, here's where I live, here are the schools, here are the public schools, but here are other options in a very big choice-driven state. So I would encourage you, you may never get the private sector to be doing the same level of accountability that public schools do. However, that doesn't mean you can't share incremental, meaningful data to parents about what might my options be. And actually, because Florida Department of Education just this week launched their revised, or their very first, just robust website that includes school reporting data and a lot of parent information, and they have their placeholder for school choice. That their vision too is to be able to say, okay, here's where my school is, what's over here for me? Just simply trying to give parents better information about what they really want.
So we only have a couple minutes left before we're going to end the panel, and we have hundreds of questions left to be asked. I know that my fellow panelists will be around if you'd like to stop and talk to them. I know that there are a number of things coming out. Shan, you mentioned the prototype of the report card coming out. You want to just give a plug for that, and then Cindy, you have something else.
Absolutely. You got handouts, and actually we had a table set outside, and we also have one right before you go to lunch, or if you get bored during lunch, you can go out, so that you can actually play with the Know Your Florida School beta test site. It has a lot of the functionality that, and I told her, a lot of our staff had Georgia's school report card, on our favorites, going, ooh, we like that function. Go look over there. And I think part of the power is you have so much information available from national partners and state partners. There's really no excuse not to get started.
Cindy, you want to mention the project you're working on?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been in the field in 5 or 6 states partnering with chiefs to try to create this parent-focused report card and really just to help them understand what does good look like. How can we have an evidence-based approach to this 2-page, 3-page at most parent report card that will go out to parents from the schools but will be ESSA compliant. So we're going to take a shot at a blue sky, literally just what the definition of good looks like with lots of questions to start that conversation. We're partnering with Melissa here at CCSSO. It's in response to a conversation we had with many of the communications directors at the state level that said they just want to see something that is starting with parents and asking parents what do they need and what do they want. So we hope to have that now that we're in Ohio in the field this week. We'll be out of the field next week and looking to produce something with lots of partner involvement by mid-January.
And Amy mentioned too that the report that just came out today? Yesterday, the Show Me the Data out on their website, and I think you have some materials here as well. So I'm just going to close with where I started. I think back to I came from Idaho, and one of my jobs was actually creating, state report cards and creating the data that went into it, and I couldn't understand why no one was as excited about it or didn't understand it as much as I did. And then I moved here, and I don't do that anymore, and I get those reports for my kids, and I have no idea what I'm reading. It was a whole new world to just open that up and go, I think I understand a little better, to put yourself back in that perspective. And I care about 3 things, really, when I look at my own kids' report cards. So it is an eye-opening experience and to take yourself out of the weeds. But I would just say it's so important to make it matter, make it easily understood, and to know your audience, and to not just assume we need one universal report card with like 1,000 data points to get the point across, that there's a different way to do that. So please join me in thanking our panelists. They have been wonderful.